I'm Julia.
And I'm Pia, and our presentation is called The Price of Progress, Comparing Investment Strategies and Corporate Responsibility in Developing Nations.
So for this research presentation, we'll first begin with a brief introduction and then give some background concepts. Then we'll dive into our two case studies, one on the Green Gavin Initiative and another one on the Mongolian mining industry. Then we'll address some limitations and counterarguments and conclude with a brief Q&A.
So our research question was how do various investment strategies compare developing countries and what responsibilities do large corporations have regarding their impact?
We hypothesized that ESG investing can drive sustainable economic growth and mitigate social or environmental risks, provided that there are strong regulatory frameworks, corporate transparency, long-term investment commitment, and tangible benefits for local communities. We also hypothesized that researching the correlation between financial success and how environmentally or socially conscious a company is can lead us to discover how to promote this on a larger scale. Without accountability, ESG investment risks becoming a marketing tool rather than a force for meaningful change.
My mom has been an ESG fund manager for over 10 years, and I've grown up hearing about these terms and concepts at the dinner table. It's one of the reasons why I became interested in ESG investing, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. It's a way of evaluating a company not just by their profits, but by how responsibly they operate in the world. We'll also be talking about impact investing, which is about making investments that have positive social and environmental effects along with financial gain. Finally, we'll be talking about regulatory frameworks, which are established rules and practices a company must follow to ensure they operate legally. So our first case study is the Green Gavin Initiative. So let's start with Gavin. Gavin is a small country in Central Africa that doesn't always make headlines, but is a huge deal when talking about conservation. It's about 88% covered in tropical rainforest, which makes it part of the Congo Basin, the world's second largest rainforest in the world after the Amazon. That gives Gavin massive importance in absorbing carbon and protecting its biodiversity. But it's also an economy that's historically relied on oil and logging, industries that aren't sustainable long-term. So it's been stuck between needing economic development and protecting its environment. In the past, Gavin exported a lot of raw timber and oil. Most of that value left the country. Trees were cut down and shipped out without being processed locally. While conservation efforts did exist, they weren't really tied to the economy, as they didn't bring in any revenue or create any new jobs. So the focus was on short-term economic gain rather than long-term sustainability. However, Gavin is now taking a very different approach, one that connects conservation with protecting their environment. They've started requiring local processing of timber to keep jobs and value in the country. They've also expanded marine and forest protected zones. And the biggest part is they started selling carbon credits. So now instead of cutting down trees, they're getting paid to keep them standing. That's a really new powerful model which is used in countries which are still developing economically but are rich in nature. Gavin didn't just stop at cutting down trees. They created a whole economic strategy around forest protection. They launched a green economy model that links conservation to economic growth. Gavin also secured a 10-year, $150 million deal with Norway through the Central African Forest Initiative, which pays for their conservation efforts and carbon emission reduction. They also launched the Blue Bonds Initiative. Blue bonds are a financial mechanism that helps countries raise capital to protect their ocean and marine resources. Gavin used these bonds to refinance its debt and fund ocean and marine ecosystems. They turn sustainability into a revenue stream. And it's working. Gavin is now one of the only countries in the entire world which is carbon negative, meaning it absorbs more carbon than it lets out. It's created new opportunities in sectors like ecotourism and green innovation, and moved away from solely relying on oil. Looking forward, Gavin wants to scale up carbon credit trading and become a global leader in climate solutions. And what we normally see in developing countries is that they think they can only have one or the other, sustainability or economic growth. And Gavin shows us a model on having the best of both worlds. Gavin shows us that these factors are not mutually exclusive, as they are rapidly developing their economy while keeping it sustainable in the long run.
Okay, so before we move on to our second case study, I want to talk a little bit about foreign direct investment, or FDI. So FDI is an investment made by a foreign company or individual in another country. A lot of developing countries work to attract FDI as they see see it as a way to boost their economic growth and development. From 1985 to 2016, the US has been the world's largest recipient of FDI, but its global share has declined as FDI in countries around the world continues to increase. The benefit for companies is that they can obtain raw materials at a low cost, often due to lenient regulations in developing countries. It's traditionally viewed as a win-win situation for both the foreign investors and the developing countries, but new research has suggested otherwise. One such case is in the Mongolian mining industry, where rich deposits of coal, copper, and gold in Mongolia were to attract various FDIs. FDI has played a major factor in the development of Mongolia's mining sector, and the government has made efforts to further draw investors. However, it has remained inconsistent due to regulatory concerns and high global prices overall. Currently, the mining sector makes up over 70% of Mongolia's total FDI, rising to $25 billion from 2009 to 2018. This means that the country's economy is heavily dependent on this one specific industry. Okay. The two types of environmental or resource depletion that are crucial to this case study are first, ecological addition, which refers to the pollution added to the environment as a byproduct of human waste. So think littering or carbon emissions. The other kind is ecological withdrawal, which refers to taking away resources from the environment, such as mining or deforestation. A study published in the journal Society and Natural Resources analyzed 125 countries from 2005 to 2013, and they researched the correlation between FDI and resource depletion. They found that not only does FDI create economic dependency on continued resource depletion, it promotes an extremely unhealthy and unsustainable cycle, particularly for developing countries. Foreign investors risk turning developing countries into supply pots for their supply chains, with no regard to the environmental and social state. This is harmful in terms of both ecological addition and withdrawal, as mining processes contribute to both. This also connects to the treadmill of production theory discussed in their study as well. It states that an expanding global economy leads to increased resource depletion and pollution, while wealthy countries reap the benefits of this cycle, and developing countries are left to suffer the environmental and economic consequences. I focus my analysis on the government and regulatory frameworks in Mongolia. The government has recently simplified permit processes and reduced bureaucracy and regulations in order to draw more foreign investors. However, this leaves the country's natural resources vulnerable to resource depletion. Additionally, losses in the mining industry lead to vulnerability and poverty in the entire country. This is an extremely important factor to take into account when thinking of possible ideas or solutions, as they contain real implications for local residents. For example, large mines account for 78.3% of regional water use in already water-scarce areas of Mongolia. Change begins with the government. The government needs to prioritize local partnerships over the profit-driven agendas of foreign companies in order to create sustainable economic growth in the long run.
Now I want to address some of the common counterarguments to ESG investing in the Green Gammon Initiative and share some of my responses to them. First, there is the concern that ESG-focused investment strategies may limit short-term industrial growth and revenue. And while that is true to an extent, it's important to look at the bigger picture. ESG investing actually builds long-term economic resilience by preventing environmental damage that could hurt future growth. It also opens up opportunities in new sectors like ecotourism and green innovation, which allows the country to become more sustainable over time. Another concern is that conservation policies can marginalize local communities, especially if those communities are not involved in the process. But in places like Gabon, we see a different model, one that emphasizes community involvement and job creation through conservation. When done thoughtfully, ESG policies can empower local populations rather than displace them. So while these concerns are valid, they highlight the need for smart, inclusive, and diversified ESG strategies, not a reason to avoid them altogether.
A few common counterarguments to the second case study is that FDI leads to local job opportunities and supports local education programs such as building schools. Additionally, Mongolian companies don't have the resources or technology to mine for natural resources themselves, leading them to outsource it from foreign tech. Although these are valid concerns, elected officials and policymakers need to see past the initial influx of growth from FDI and recognize the long-term environmental impacts. Although it can be difficult for a developing country to put its own needs in front of a foreign investor with more financial leverage, It is necessary to promote sustainable investments and foster growth that does not come at the expense of social or environmental factors.
As seen through successful and unsuccessful examples of environmentally and socially conscious investments in developing countries, changes start with building policies and regulatory frameworks that work with and support local communities.
This emphasizes the importance of representation in positions of power and the responsibilities that corporations have surrounding the impact of their financial leverage, and a need to look past the supply aspect of developing countries, to see the long-term impacts and collaborate with them in local partnerships.
So thinking about the long run as we developing countries, that become a bit more urbanized and people become more educated and see more corporate jobs. How do you see these economic models growing alongside the group?
So as I discussed earlier, FDI obviously contributes heavily to economic growth, such as in the Mongolian mining industry. Over 70% of the country's FDI is reliant on the mining sector, so it relies on that sector. But in the long run, FDI promotes resource depletion. And as the economy grows, so does the dependency on resource depletion. And so what we're looking at is to move away from foreign direct investments that outsource the income and to create in-house processes such as in Gabon, the Green Gabon Initiative, that partner with local companies and create sustainable economic growth.
And then, like as she was discussing in the Green Gabon Initiative, they were working with the local communities to make their country more sustainable. They established many new jobs in many new sectors like ecotourism and green innovation. So with a growing economy and growing population, the jobs will now they will create more jobs in those sectors and overall benefit the country.
Are there any similar sort of green policies that they're making for countries that they get less money from the property majors, so less of logging and that maybe more manufacturing? Are there any kind of green ways to support that as well, or is it sort of just for developing countries that are more based around getting that information?
I think for our presentation, we primarily focused on these different investment strategies in developing countries. So at least in my situation, they already had 88% of their country was tropical rainforest, so they were able to leverage that to build their economy. But in other countries where it may be more developed, they have, I think, other ways, they already have the jobs that are necessary for the people to be employed. So I think that using, in these countries, using their nature was their only resource to build their economy. I think they're viable for countries which have a lot of nature, like I said, and carbon credits, it depends on who owns that land, but they're normally issued by the government. Similarly in blue bonds, the people who issue the blue bonds are the people who have the rights of that property, of that body of land or area.
If carbon credit usage becomes more widespread, then would the competition for a more profitable carbon credit, what do you foresee the impact of that being on food sustainability?
Wait, sorry, could you clarify a little?
If carbon credits become more widespread, more countries are using them, but there's having an impact on these green sustainability initiatives, do you think it would have an additional impact on these countries, or would it shift the positive impact to other countries and more countries?
I think overall, if we're thinking the entire world, I think it would positively impact the world because what we want is we want like underdeveloped countries to become like more developed, and by having more carbon credits in different areas of the world, the whole the whole economy of the world almost will like, become like more developed.
Thank you.